Brinkvale was once a peaceful town, a place where golden sunlight spilled onto quiet streets in the afternoons, where children rode their bikes laughing without fear, where the police were not just enforcers of the law, but neighbors, friends, and protectors of the people. But that was a story of the past, a Brinkvale that no longer exists. Now, the town lives in the shadow of fear. Doors lock the moment the sun disappears. Conversations are spoken in hushed tone. No one dares to look a police officer in the eye because everyone understands one truth. Brinkvale no longer belongs to its people. It belongs to those who wear the blue uniform but carry souls stained with violence and corruption. At the heart of this decay is Vincent Marlowe, the chief of police, a man above the law, the one who decides who walks free and who disappears forever. He does not enforce the law, he owns it. Under his control, the law is merely a weapon, used to protect those who serve his interests and to crush those who dare to challenge him. The dark alleyways, once filled only with the eerie cries of stray cats in the dead of night, have become hunting grounds for the enforcers of Marlowe's rule. Marcus Dwyer, his loyal right hand, executes every command without hesitation. If Marlowe makes the rules, Dwyer ensures that no one dares to break them. The people of Brinkvale no longer seek protection from the police, they seek protection from them. In a forgotten corner of the town where streetlights had long since burned out and no one bothered to replace them, one event changed everything. A man, his name now nothing more than a whisper on the lips of those who dare to remember, made a fatal mistake. He thought he could bring a small piece of the truth into the light. Just a few articles about mysterious missing funds from the town's budget. Just a few questions about unsolved cases. But in Brinkvale, even a single flicker of light is enough to burn the one who dares to ignite it. 3 days later, his car was found outside town, burned beyond recognition, and from that moment, no one spoke his name again. But not everyone was willing to bow to fear. Emily Grayson once believed in justice. She thought that joining the police force was the right way to make a difference. She believed that if she worked hard, if she never wavered, she could change things. But that belief shattered, piece by piece. The first time, she thought it was an oversight, a major case suddenly dismissed with no real explanation, and no one in the department seemed to care. The second time, she began to suspect a batch of evidence from a drug case mysteriously disappeared, yet no one bothered to investigate. The third time she saw it with her own eyes, Marcus Dwyer beating a man nearly to death in a dark alley, only for the report to be filed under self-defense. That was the moment she understood. The system was not broken. It had never worked the way she thought it did. The officers around her were not just individuals lured by money or power. They were part of a massive machine, greased with blood and fueled by fear. And she, if she wasn't careful, would be the next cog to be crushed. In Brinkvale, there were unspoken rules. Do not ask questions. Do not dig too deep. Do not search for answers that were never meant to be found. But someone had broken those rules. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting for the perfect moment to bring it all down. They were not a soldier in this war. They had no gun, no power, but they had something far more dangerous: the truth. Naomi Ellis was just a records clerk. An unnoticed, dull job, lost among stacks of old files and forgotten paperwork. Every day she sat surrounded by yellowed pages, flipping through case reports no one cared about. And that was exactly why no one paid attention to her. But Naomi was not just a records clerk. She was the silent eye in the storm, the unseen hand collecting scattered pieces of a much larger puzzle. Every altered report, every missing document, every case that should have led to convictions but had been erased, she saw it all. They thought she was invisible, but that was exactly what she needed to be. Because once everything was in place, once the full picture was complete, Brinkvale would never be the same again. Late one night when the town had all but fallen silent, Naomi flipped open an old case file. The scent of aged paper lingered in the air, the dim yellow light from her desk lamp casting soft shadows across her face. The pages trembled slightly beneath her fingertips. A familiar name. A case marked unsolved. A blatant lie. Footsteps echoed on the cold stone floor, slow, deliberate, purposeful. She looked up. Standing in the doorway was Emily Grayson, her eyes sharper than ever. They locked eyes. No words were spoken, but in that moment, one thing was clear. The storm was coming. Brinkvale had been drowning in darkness for too long, but darkness cannot last forever. Theoretically, the police are the protectors of justice, the force that stands between chaos and order. But in Brinkvale, justice no longer exists. This town is not a place where truth is found. Here, the law is a game, a smokescreen designed to shield those who truly hold power. The people no longer believe in police badges, no longer trust promises of fairness. Because in Brinkvale, justice does not belong to the righteous. It belongs to the strong. At the center of this corruption is Vincent Marlowe, the town's police chief. He is not just corrupt, he is the system itself. Under his iron grip, the entire police force operates like an organized crime syndicate. He controls everything: drugs, extortion, bribery, and even the lives of those in town. He does not act alone. Marcus Dwyer, the deputy chief, is his ruthless enforcer. Those who disobey, those who dare to challenge Marlowe's authority, never get a second chance. In the darkness of this decayed system, no one thought there would be anyone brave enough to take it down. But they were wrong. Naomi Ellis was not a hero in anyone's eyes. She had no gun, no power, no badge to shield her. But she had something far more dangerous: the truth. She was a records clerk at the Brinkvale courthouse. A dull, monotonous job filled with stacks of aging documents and case files no one bothered to read. People passed by her every day, never noticing her, never considering her a threat, and that was exactly what made her dangerous. Every day, she silently sifted through hundreds of case files, altered reports, evidence that had mysteriously disappeared, names erased, numbers that didn't add up, cases closed without a reasonable explanation. She remembered everything. And then she began connecting the dots: disappearances, suspicious deaths, untraceable money, all leading back to one place: the Brinkvale Police Department's evidence room. Late one night, as the courthouse lights flickered dimly, Naomi sat at her desk, eyes locked on her computer screen. Before her was a series of closed case files, but something didn't add up. The financial records didn't match. Evidence that should have been logged had vanished. And then she saw it. A name: Marcus Dwyer. Beneath the cases that had been buried, beneath the manipulated evidence and erased testimonies, his name appeared more than any other. Her heartbeat pounded in her chest. Her fingers trembled slightly as she moved the cursor across the screen. He had been careful, but not careful enough. She had found a crack in his cover-up, a case that should have remained hidden, yet had left a small trace behind. A report from an officer who had mysteriously disappeared. Naomi took a deep breath. She knew exactly what this meant. If Marlowe and Dwyer found out she was searching for the truth, there would be no turning back. But she couldn't stop now. In Brinkvale, secrets could kill, and someone already knew Naomi was digging too deep. The next morning, when she entered her office, something felt wrong. Her desk drawer was slightly ajar, even though she distinctly remembered locking it the night before. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the phone in her pocket. A single sheet of paper lay on her desk. No words, no threats, just one thing. A black fingerprint smudged in ink, pressed in the center of the page. A warning. Stop before it's too late. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't let her face betray her fear. She picked up the paper, tucked it into her pocket, and scanned the room. No one seemed out of place. No one stared at her for too long. But she knew. Someone was watching. That night, she didn't go home. She drove to a small cafe on the outskirts of town, a place where no one would recognize her. And then, a figure sat down across from her. Emily Grayson, a cop who had once trusted the system, but was now beginning to see the cracks within it. They stared at each other in silence for a long moment before Naomi finally spoke. "Do you have what I need?" Emily reached into her coat, pulling out a plain brown envelope. She placed it on the table, tapping her fingers against the edge. "Evidence," she said, her voice low and cautious. "But if you take this, there's no turning back." Naomi stared at the envelope, her mind racing through countless scenarios. If she moved forward, she might become the next name erased from the courthouse records. But she had no other choice. She reached forward and took it, and in that moment, everything changed. The night in Brinkvale felt darker than usual. The wind howled through the town, slipping through the cracks of old buildings, carrying an eerie chill through the streets. Naomi sat in her small apartment, the dim yellow light of her desk lamp illuminating the scattered documents in front of her. Photographs of Marcus Dwyer accepting money from an unknown figure. Copies of case files that had vanished from the evidence room. A recording, Dwyer's voice, low and menacing. If he won't cooperate, then it's simple. Deal with him like the others. Naomi closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. She had everything she needed, but the biggest question remained unanswered. How do you bring the truth into the light without being buried along with it? The dim glow from the old desk lamp cast flickering shadows over Naomi Ellis's tense face. In front of her, scattered documents lay across the worn wooden surface. Crumpled pages filled with the damning traces of a system rotten to its core. She had spent months peeling back the layers of Vincent Violo and Marcus Dwyer's empire. The monsters in uniform who had turned Brinkvale into a kingdom of fear. But now, with the evidence in her hands, Naomi wasn't sure of anything anymore. Outside, the wind howled through the alleyways, carrying a biting chill through the aging brick walls. The distant wail of police sirens echoed through the night, a cruel reminder that she was still deep in enemy territory. Naomi ran a finger lightly over the brown envelope Emily Grayson had handed her earlier that evening. It looked harmless, but inside lay the weight of an entire empire's downfall. She took a deep breath, unzipping her battered laptop, her exhausted eyes scanning the digitized files. A grainy image of a parking lot at midnight, Dwyer receiving a briefcase from an unidentified man, an audio recording, distorted but unmistakably clear. If he doesn't cooperate, it's simple. Handle him like the others. The words rang through the small room, twisting her stomach into knots. This was no longer speculation. This was the truth. The only question now was, how do I expose it without disappearing along with it? Naomi snapped her laptop shut when she heard the faintest sound outside her window. A soft scratching. She froze. Her fingers hovered over the small handgun hidden in her desk drawer. She had never imagined she would need it, but Brinkvale was no place for the weak. Moving carefully, she edged closer to the window, her heartbeat hammering in her chest. A shadow. Naomi tightened her grip on the gun, her breath catching in her throat. Then a voice, low, barely above a whisper. "Naomi, open the door, it's me." Emily Grayson. The tension in her muscles eased, but the paranoia didn't fade entirely. She tugged the curtain aside, spotting Emily standing there, her long coat pulled tight around her, her expression taut with urgency. Naomi unlocked the door and Emily stepped inside swiftly, shutting it behind her in one quick motion. "What is it?" Naomi asked, her voice low and sharp. Emily tossed a newspaper onto the desk. The headline sent a cold wave down Naomi's spine. Former officer Dylan Hayes disappears under mysterious circumstances. Brinkvale police refused to comment. Naomi felt the floor drop beneath her. Dylan Hayes, the only person who could help her get the evidence to the public, was gone. "I saw him just yesterday," Emily said, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "He knew something they didn't want getting out." Naomi gripped the edge of the desk, forcing herself to stay steady. "They know," she whispered. "They know we're following the trail." Emily nodded, her eyes cold and hard. "And we're next." Brinkvale is no place for those who seek justice. An hour later, Naomi and Emily slipped out of the apartment, moving through the shadows like fugitives in their own town. Naomi kept the USB drive containing the evidence tucked inside her coat pocket, its metallic weight pressing against her chest like a constant reminder of the danger they were in. Their footsteps were barely audible against the damp pavement. The town remained eerily silent, but Naomi knew that somewhere in the darkness, Marlowe and Dwyer's eyes were watching. Emily stopped near an old payphone on the corner of a deserted street. "We need someone who can release this information immediately," she said. Naomi hesitated. She knew someone. Sam Whitaker, an independent journalist, a man who had nearly been killed for digging too deep into Brinkvale's corruption before, but reaching out to him meant exposing themselves. "We don't have a choice," Naomi said, pulling out her phone. She dialed the number. The line rang twice before a deep, cautious voice answered. "Who is this?" "It's Naomi Ellis," she said quickly. "I have what you've been looking for." Silence stretched for a few seconds before Sam finally spoke. "Meet me at the South Warehouse, alone." Emily shook her head immediately. No, this has to be a setup. Naomi knew she was right, but this was their only shot. South Warehouse, 1:30 a.m. Naomi stepped inside, the flickering overhead lights casting long, shifting shadows against rusted steel beams and weathered wooden crates. Sam Whitaker stood in the center of the room, his posture tense, his eyes scanning every corner of the warehouse. "What do you have?" he asked. Naomi reached into her coat and pulled out the USB drive. "Everything you need to take down Marlowe and Dwyer." Sam took it, flipping it between his fingers before nodding. "Good, I'll handle the rest." Naomi exhaled, relief creeping in, but just as she opened her mouth to speak, the screech of tires echoed outside. The warehouse doors burst open. Marcus Dwyer stepped inside. Behind him, 2 officers followed, their weapons already drawn. Naomi and Sam stood frozen. Dwyer smirked, strolling forward with deliberate slowness. "I told you," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "In Brinkvale, the truth doesn't get to exist." Fear clenched around Naomi's ribs, but she refused to let it paralyze her. Dwyer raised his gun, but before he could pull the trigger, another gunshot rang out. He staggered, shock flashing across his face before his body collapsed onto the cold warehouse floor. Behind him, Emily Grayson stepped into view, her gun still smoking. "It's time to change the rules," she said coldly. Naomi took a deep breath. Their fight wasn't over, but tonight they had won a battle. Outside, police lights flashed against the night sky, and for the first time in years, Brinkvale had a chance to finally see the light. The crimson glow of police lights flickered against the night, painting the Brinkvale sky with sharp, flashing streaks like the slash of a cold blade. The scent of gunpowder still lingered in the air, mixing with the chill of midnight and the metallic tang of freshly spilled blood. Naomi Ellis stood frozen, her heart pounding wildly, her gaze locked onto Marcus Dwyer, the man who had terrorized this town for so long, now lying motionless on the warehouse floor, his unblinking eyes staring into nothingness. The gun in Emily Grayson's hand was still smoking. She took a deep breath, gripping the weapon tightly as if it were the only thing keeping her steady in the storm that was about to break. "We have to go. Now." Emily's voice was hoarse, urgent. Naomi nodded, but her eyes lingered on the tiny USB drive clutched in Sam Whitaker's hand. The evidence they needed. The one thing that could dismantle the entire corrupt empire. But how could they expose it without being silenced first? Sam read her thoughts. He tightened his grip on the USB, glancing toward the warehouse entrance, where the flashing lights of approaching police cars painted ominous patterns on the walls. "I have a way, but we need to move, fast." Emily shot Naomi a glance, then gave a firm nod. "Let's go." And with that, they vanished into the darkness, leaving behind the lifeless body of Marcus Dwyer and the gasping, bloodied officers sprawled across the cold concrete. The darkness before the storm. They drove through the deserted streets, where even at this late hour, eyes peeked out from behind curtain-covered windows. In Brinkvale, people knew when to stay silent and when to look the other way. Sam's car glided smoothly over the pavement, the engine humming low like a predator stalking its prey. Naomi stared out the window, the glow of streetlights casting ghostly shapes against the crumbling buildings and the pitch-black alleyways that seemed to swallow the town whole. Sam remained silent, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror every few seconds, sharp and watchful, as if expecting an ambush at any moment. Emily sat in the back seat, her gun still in hand, her gaze locked on the mirror as well. Her voice was low, tense. "Marlowe won't let this slide. He'll want to shut us up, permanently." Naomi clenched her fists. Vincent Marlowe, the mastermind behind it all. If Marcus Dwyer was the blade of the system, Marlowe was the hand that wielded it. "We don't have much time," Naomi said, turning to Sam. "What's your plan?" Sam exhaled slowly, his knuckles tightening around the steering wheel. "I have a contact at the local news station. If we can get this data out before Marlowe gets to them, we stand a chance." Naomi nodded, but a gnawing dread twisted in her stomach. A part of her knew Marlowe wouldn't go down that easily. The trap. Sam turned down a narrow street, heading toward the old Brinkvale news station, But as soon as the car rolled to a stop, Naomi felt something was wrong, too quiet. She glanced at Emily and saw the same alertness in her eyes. Sam lifted the USB, preparing to step out of the car. "Wait!" Naomi whispered, but it was already too late. Gunfire erupted. Glass shattered, spraying shards through the air. Sam cursed, ducking down instantly. Naomi recoiled, her pulse hammering as she instinctively shrank against the seat. Emily swore under her breath, diving out of the car, gun raised. "They found us." Figures emerged from the shadows, gun barrels flashing in the dim light. A voice, smooth and dripping with malice, cut through the frigid night air. "Did you really think you could bring me down that easily, Vincent Marlowe?" He stepped out from the darkness, his stride slow, calculated, like a man who had already won. Behind him, 4 officers stood ready, weapons drawn, their eyes void of mercy. Naomi's breath hitched. They were trapped. Marlowe scanned the scene, his gaze lingering on Sam before extending a hand. "Give it to me." Sam gritted his teeth, gripping the USB tighter. "You can't bury the truth forever." Marlowe chuckled, the sound cold, soulless. "The truth?" He shook his head. "Do you know how many people have tried this before you? Do you know where they are now?" Naomi felt the anger rising in her chest. "No one is untouchable, Marlowe." Her voice was steady, defiant. Marlowe's smirk faded as his eyes darkened. "Perhaps, but you won't be the one to change the rules." The reversal. Before Marlowe could give the order, a deafening siren split through the air. Marlowe stiffened, his head snapping toward the street. And then, red and blue lights flooded the darkness. But these weren't his officers. FBI. Emily smirked, lifting her gun slightly. "Looks like we're playing by new rules now, Marlowe." The open ending. In seconds, the scene flipped. Marlowe was forced to the ground, his arms wrenched behind his back as federal agents swarmed the area. His officers, once feared in Brinkvale, were now the ones being thrown into the backs of police cars, their badges stripped, their reign of terror collapsing in front of them. Naomi stood still, her breath shaky but steadying. Sam stepped forward, placing the USB into her hand. "You did it." But deep inside, Naomi knew the fight wasn't truly over. Brinkvale might have clawed back a sliver of light, but darkness still lurked in its hidden corners, waiting for its chance to rise again. And if this ordeal had taught Naomi Ellis anything, it was this. Justice doesn't simply happen, it has to be taken. At any cost. The fall. The courtroom lights cast a stark glow on Vincent Marlowe, the former police chief of Brinkvale, a man who once controlled the town like a puppet master pulling invisible strings. Now, stripped of his uniform and the arrogant glint of untouchability in his eyes, he was just another man awaiting judgment. Across from him, Naomi Ellis sat at the prosecution's table, her gaze sharp as a blade, ready to cut through every lie he had ever spun. Beside her, Emily Grayson sat with arms crossed, her eyes locked on Marlowe, refusing to look away for even a second. This was the moment they had fought for. Months of danger, loss, and relentless pursuit of justice had led to this. The only question left was, would justice finally prevail? The final moves. The air in the courtroom was thick, heavy with unspoken truths and the weight of secrets about to be exposed. The judge's gavel struck. "Court is now in session." Marlowe leaned back in his chair, arms folded, a smug smirk lingering on his lips. He still thought he would win. Naomi glanced toward Sam Whitaker, sitting in the witness stand, his hands clenched tightly, tension carved into his features. Everyone in that room understood. This was more than just a trial. This was war. The prosecutor stepped forward, eyes steely with resolve. "Vincent Marlowe, you are charged with corruption, bribery, abuse of power, and conspiracy to commit murder. We have irrefutable evidence proving that you turned Brinkvale into your personal kingdom, where the law existed only to serve the powerful." Marlowe scoffed. He leaned back slightly, casting a quick glance at the judge, who cleared his throat uncomfortably. Naomi noticed. He wasn't afraid. He had spent years pulling strings behind the scenes, buying officials, silencing dissent, and using brute force to keep control. But today would be different. The final evidence. As the prosecutor began presenting the evidence, a suffocating silence filled the courtroom. A projector screen descended. Naomi clenched her fists as the first audio recording played, the one she had pulled from the police department's hidden archives. "If he won't cooperate, it's simple. Handle him like the others." Marcus Dwyer's voice rang through the courtroom, sending a visible chill through those present. The same Marcus Dwyer who had died by Emily's bullet. Next, a grainy surveillance image appeared. Vincent Marlowe in a warehouse, exchanging a briefcase full of money with a masked man. Then, another recording, this time a hidden camera feed. A man kneeling on the floor, hands bound behind his back. Marlowe stepped into frame, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "You should have known better than to dig too deep." Then, a gunshot. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Naomi inhaled slowly, suppressing the chill that ran down her spine. They had uncovered the truth, but was it enough to bring Marlowe down? The mask slips. Naomi turned her gaze to Marlowe. He was still calm, but this time something was different. He wasn't smiling. For the first time, he saw something he had never expected. Fear. Emily's lips curled in disgust. "What now, Marlowe? No one coming to save you?" His eyes flicked to the judge. A silent plea. A desperate signal that he still had power left to pull some strings. But this time, no one answered. The people who had once shielded him, protected him, were now realizing the truth. He was no longer invincible. The silence in the courtroom became its own kind of verdict. Marlowe swallowed hard. He knew then, the game was over. The verdict. The gavel struck the bench once more. "Does the defendant have anything to say before sentencing?" Marlowe scanned the room. The people who had once feared him now looked at him with nothing but contempt. He had no allies left. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The judge nodded, his voice firm, decisive. "The court finds the defendant guilty on all charges." A roar of noise broke out. Naomi felt the crushing weight of months of struggle finally lift from her shoulders. Marlowe sat motionless. The officers approached, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. He didn't resist. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to lose, a light in the darkness. Outside the courthouse, the golden afternoon sun filtered through the old trees of Brinkvale. The townspeople were waiting, and when Marlowe was led outside, bound and defeated, applause erupted. Not for celebration, but for hope. Naomi inhaled deeply. She knew this fight wasn't truly over. Brinkvale still had hidden threats, people in the shadows pulling strings. But today, they had won a battle. Emily stepped up beside her, watching the cheering crowd. "We did it." Naomi nodded, but as she pulled out her phone, a message flashed on the screen. Unknown number. Marlowe was just a pawn. The game isn't over. Naomi tightened her grip on the phone. The darkness hadn't vanished just yet, but this time she was ready for it. To be continued. The truth always needs someone brave enough to reveal it. In the story of Brinkvale, we witness a sobering reality. Justice does not appear on its own. It must be fought for. When those in power manipulate the law to hide their wrongdoings, ordinary people live in fear, believing they are powerless to change anything. But it is individuals like Naomi Ellis, Emily Grayson, and Sam Whitaker, ordinary yet courageous, who dared to stand up and expose the truth. This story delivers an important lesson. Injustice thrives as long as people remain silent. In life, we often encounter wrongdoing, from small everyday injustices to large-scale abuses of power. At times, we may feel too insignificant to make a difference, but history has proven otherwise. A single voice, one action, or even just the right decision can set change in motion. For older generations, those who have witnessed the highs and lows of life, this story serves as a reminder that our responsibility is not just to live each day, but to leave behind a legacy of integrity for those who come after us. The truth may be hidden for a time, but it never disappears, and it is those who dare to speak up, to fight for what is right, who ultimately change the world. If you believe justice must be defended, hit like and subscribe to the channel to keep uncovering the truth with us.